What if I told you that one moment of courage could create a bond so powerful it defies everything we thought we knew about humans and wild animals? Imagine standing face to face with a 400-pound lioness, your life hanging by a thread, only to discover she recognizes you not as prey, but as something more. Today's story will take you deep into the Serengeti, where American Ranger Emily Carter's split-second decision to save an injured lioness and her cub created a connection that scientists still can't explain. Hit subscribe and comment where you're watching from. Are you ready to discover what happened when the line between human and wild disappeared? Let's go. The African sun crept over the eastern horizon, painting the vast expanse of the Serengeti in shades of amber and gold. Emily Carter, 28, stood at the threshold of her modest ranger outpost, squinting against the growing light. Her weathered khaki uniform hung loosely on her athletic frame, the forest green patches of Tanzania's National Parks Authority standing in stark contrast against the desert tan. Her chestnut hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail, and a light spray of freckles dusted her sun-kissed face, testament to countless hours spent under the African sky. Emily took a deep breath, savoring the distinct morning scent of the savanna, a mixture of dry grass, earth, and the faint muskiness of wildlife. 6,000 miles from her hometown in Bozeman, Montana, yet she had never felt more at home. Radio check, Emily. You reading me? The crackling voice of Robert Kamathi, her supervisor, pulled her from her reverie. Copy that, Robert. Starting my patrol route now, she replied, adjusting her wide-brimmed hat. Be careful out there. Spotted some suspicious tire tracks near the eastern boundary yesterday. Could be nothing, but it's never nothing. Emily finished his sentence. I'll keep my eyes open. As she climbed into her dusty green Jeep Wrangler, Emily glanced at the small framed photograph she'd taped to the dashboard. It showed a bearded man in his 50s, smiling broadly while holding a clipboard beside a tranquilized wolf. Dr. James Carter, her father, her hero, and the reason she dedicated her life to wildlife conservation. Another day in paradise, Dad, she whispered, running her thumb over the image before starting the engine. The memory of their last conversation played in her mind as she navigated the rutted trail leading deeper into the park. The animals don't have a voice in our world, Em, her father had told her during their last phone call before his heart attack 3 years ago. They need people willing to stand in the gap, to speak for them when no one else will. 2 weeks later, he was gone, leaving Emily to carry his legacy forward, a task she embraced with both determination and grief. Her journey from the mountains of Montana to the plains of Tanzania hadn't been simple. After earning her degree in wildlife biology from the University of Montana, she'd spent 2 years working with conservation efforts in Yellowstone, tracking and studying wolf populations her father had helped reintroduce. When the opportunity came to join an international anti-poaching task force in East Africa, she knew instantly it was her calling. Her colleagues had been skeptical at first, another idealistic American coming to save Africa. But Emily's genuine respect for the land and her tireless work ethic had gradually earned their acceptance, if not yet their complete trust. You think too much with your heart, Carter, her colleague Marcus had warned her last week. These poachers aren't just weekend hunters. They're organized, they're armed, and they'll shoot a ranger as easily as they'd shoot a rhino. Emily knew he was right, but she couldn't help herself. The Serengeti had gotten under her skin, into her blood. The animals she protected weren't just conservation statistics. They were individuals fighting for survival in an increasingly hostile world. As she drove, a family of giraffes crossed the trail ahead, their elegant silhouettes stark against the rising sun. Emily slowed the Jeep, watching their graceful movements with a sense of wonder that had never dimmed, not even after 2 years in this magical place. That's why I'm here, she said aloud to herself. For moments like this. For them. Little did she know, as she continued her patrol into the heart of the savannah, that this day would test her resolve in ways she could never have imagined. The first hint that something was wrong came around 6:30 a.m. Emily had been tracking a fresh set of tire marks, vehicles that had no business being this deep in the protected area, when she noticed disturbed earth and broken vegetation off the main trail. Shifting the Jeep into park, she grabbed her binoculars and service pistol, though she hoped she wouldn't need the latter. Base, this is Carter, she radioed. I'm about 12 clicks east of Lookout Point. Possible signs of intrusion. Going to investigate on foot. Copy that, Robert replied, voice tight with concern. Backup is at least 30 minutes out if you need it. Maintain radio contact every 5 minutes. Understood. The savanna grass, waist-high and golden, whispered against her cargo pants as Emily moved silently forward, following a trail of bent stalks and occasional droplets of something dark that made her stomach clench. Blood. Fresh, not yet dried by the rapidly warming air. Please don't be rhino, she whispered, knowing the escalating value of rhino horn on black markets had led to a surge in brutal poaching incidents. The blood trail led toward a small clearing surrounded by acacia trees. Emily crouched low, her senses heightened. The morning chorus of birds had fallen eerily silent, always a warning sign. Something had disturbed the natural rhythm of this place. As she peered through a gap in the grass, her breath caught in her throat. There, in the center of the clearing, lay a magnificent lioness, her golden coat matted with blood around her hind leg. Beside her, frantically pawing at a metal snare trap, was a lion cub no more than 4 months old, its distressed mewls piercing the morning stillness. Oh God, Emily breathed, assessing the situation. The lioness's flanks heaved with labored breathing, but her amber eyes remained alert, watching her cub's desperate struggles. The trap, an illegal cable snare with cruel metal teeth, had caught the cub's front paw, and the more it pulled, the tighter the grip became. Emily's radio crackled. Carter, status check. She kept her voice to a whisper. I found a lioness and cub. The cub's caught in a poacher's snare. The mother's injured too. Looks like she tried to free it. A pause, then Robert's voice, grave. Leave it, Emily. The extraction team can handle it when they arrive. That'll be too late, Emily replied, watching the cub's increasingly frantic struggles. The cub will sever an artery if it keeps pulling. And the mother? She paused, noting how the lioness's eyes seemed to be growing dimmer by the minute. She's losing blood fast. Emily, that's an order. Lions are unpredictable, especially wounded ones protecting cubs. Her fingers tightened around the radio. I can't just watch them die, Robert. Before he could respond, she clipped the radio to her belt and carefully assessed her options. The standard protocol was clear. Wait for the wildlife extraction team with their tranquilizers and medical equipment. But the desperate scene before her demanded immediate action. Drawing on her training, Emily removed her outer shirt, leaving just her tank top in the growing heat. Slowly, she tore the fabric into strips, creating makeshift bandages. From her pack, she retrieved a small medical kit, a bottle of water, and a sturdy pair of wire cutters she carried for fence repairs. Hey there, Mama, she called softly, making her presence known as she stepped into the clearing. I'm here to help. The lioness's head snapped up, her eyes locking onto Emily with a mix of fierce protectiveness and exhaustion. A low, warning growl rumbled from her chest. I know, Emily continued, her voice steady despite her racing heart. You've got every reason not to trust humans right now. She inched forward, evaluating with each step. The mother lioness was weakened from blood loss, but a cornered predator, especially one protecting offspring, was unpredictable. One wrong move could mean death. The cub whimpered again, yanking desperately at the trap. Fresh blood appeared around the metal teeth. I'm running out of time, Emily whispered to herself. Then, taking the greatest risk of her career, she made the final approach, talking continuously in a soft, reassuring tone. Easy now, girl. Easy. I'm not one of the bad ones. Let me help your little one. The lioness watched, muscles tensed, as Emily knelt beside the panicking cub. Their eyes met, human and lioness, in a moment of primal communication. Something passed between them, an understanding beyond words, beyond species. And in that moment, Emily knew her life would never be the same. The cub's terrified shrieking intensified as Emily crouched closer. Its tiny body trembled with fear and exhaustion, golden fur matted with dirt and streaks of blood. The trap's metal teeth had cut into the delicate flesh of its right front paw, creating a wound that would cripple the young lion if not treated properly. Shoo, easy little one, Emily whispered, keeping her movements slow and deliberate. Every wildlife conservationist knew the brutal mathematics of intervention, sometimes helping meant risking everything, including your own life. The lioness growled again, this time with less vigor. Her amber eyes, clouded with pain but still fierce, followed Emily's every movement. A deep gash ran along her left flank, where she had apparently tried to free her cub from the trap, only to injure herself on the serrated metal edges. Emily's radio crackled aggressively. "Carter, report status immediately." Without taking her eyes off the big cat, she responded quietly. "I'm with them now. The cub will lose that paw if I don't act." "Damn it, Emily." Robert's voice exploded through the speaker. "You're risking your life." She clicked the radio off. Focus was essential now. Any distraction could prove fatal. "I know what you're thinking," Emily said to the lioness, maintaining soft, constant communication. "You're wondering if you should tear my throat out. I'd probably feel the same way if I were you." The lioness's ears flattened against her head as Emily inched closer to the cub. "But I'm your best shot right now," she continued, reaching for her wire cutters. "That's it. Just stay where you are." The trap was a brutal design. A cable snare with a spring-loaded mechanism that clamped down harder the more its victim struggled. It was intended for larger game, making the cub's predicament even more precarious. One slip of her hand, and the mechanism could snap completely shut, severing the limb entirely. "Okay, little fighter," Emily murmured, carefully positioning the cutters on the trap's hinge point. "This is going to hurt, but then it gets better." As steel met steel with a metallic click, the cub wailed and thrashed wildly. The mother lioness lunged halfway up, a roar building in her chest. "No, no, no," Emily gasped, freezing in place but not retreating. Her heart hammered against her ribcage as she locked eyes with the massive predator, barely 3 feet away now. "Please, I'm trying to help." For what felt like eternity, they remained in this deadly tableau, woman and lioness, prey and predator, yet somehow neither. Then, remarkably, the lioness sank back down, her breathing labored, eyes never leaving Emily's face. "Thank you," Emily breathed, turning back to the trap. With precise pressure, she leveraged the cutters against the main spring. The cub screamed again as the movement shifted the metal teeth slightly. Sweat dripped into Emily's eyes, her muscles straining against the strong mechanism. "Come on," she grunted, applying more force. "Come on." With a sudden snap, the trap's tension released. The cub immediately pulled its injured paw free, scrambling backward with pitiful mewls of pain and confusion. For a terrifying moment, it moved toward Emily in blind panic, but the mother's soft grunt pulled it back to her side. Emily exhaled shakily. "Good job, buddy. Now for your mom." The lioness's injury was different, a deep laceration rather than a trap wound. She would need antibiotics and proper care, but first, the bleeding had to be controlled. Keeping her movements telegraphed and slow, Emily soaked one of her shirt strips with clean water. "This might sting," she warned, reaching toward the wound. The lioness's muscles bunched, a warning rumble vibrating from her chest. Emily paused, then did something that went against all her training. She sat back on her heels, making herself smaller, and extended her empty palm toward the lioness. Not touching, just offering trust. "I know you're scared," she said softly. "I'm scared too. But we're past the point of no return now, aren't we?" Whether it was exhaustion, blood loss, or some deeper understanding, the lioness remained still as Emily gently cleaned the worst of the wound and applied pressure with the makeshift bandage. Up close, Emily could see the animal was younger than she'd first thought, perhaps only 3 or 4 years old, still with a slightly gangly adolescent quality beneath her powerful frame. "You're doing great," Emily encouraged, working quickly. "Just a few more minutes." The cub had calmed somewhat, huddled against its mother's side, licking its injured paw. Emily knew the little one would need antibiotics too. Infection was almost certain without treatment. She keyed her radio. "Robert, I've freed the cub. The mother has a deep laceration. I need the medical team here ASAP with tranquilizers and antibiotics." "They're 15 minutes out," came the terse reply. "Are you safe?" Emily looked at the lioness, whose eyes were now half closed, her breathing steadier. "Yes," she answered, surprising herself with the certainty in her voice. "I think I am." As she waited for the medical team, Emily maintained her position, speaking softly to the pair. The morning sun climbed higher, casting dappled shadows through the acacia branches above. In this strange, suspended moment, The barrier between human and wild seemed to thin, revealing a connection as ancient as time itself. The wildlife extraction team appeared at the edge of the clearing like ghosts materializing from the savanna grass, their movements cautious and coordinated. Dr. Injeri Curia, the park's head veterinarian, led the four-person team, her expression shifting from professional concern to visible shock as she took in the scene. Emily, kneeling beside the injured lioness and cub, bloodied makeshift bandages in place, the broken trap lying discarded nearby. "Emily," Injeri whispered harshly, tranquilizer gun at the ready. "Don't make any sudden movements. Just back away slowly." Emily raised a hand slightly, signaling for them to hold position. "She's calm right now. I don't want to startle her." "This defies all protocol," Injeri replied, but didn't advance further. At 35, with over a decade of wildlife veterinary experience, she knew better than most that nature occasionally rewrote the rules of engagement. "Is she sedated?" "No," Emily said. "Just weak from blood loss." The cub was caught in that. She nodded toward the trap. Injeri's dark eyes narrowed as she assessed the situation. "We need to tranquilize them both for proper treatment." "I know," Emily agreed. "But let's make it as stress-free as possible." For the next 20 minutes, the team worked with a synchronized precision born of experience. Injeri administered tranquilizers at the lowest effective dose, first to the mother, then to the resistant cub. As the drugs took effect, Emily found herself whispering reassurances, her hand hovering inches from the lioness's massive head. "You'll be okay now," she murmured. "Both of you." Dr. Curio worked methodically, cleaning the wounds thoroughly before administering antibiotics and anti-inflammatories. The cub's paw required delicate stitching where the trap had torn through the pad. "She's lucky," Injeri commented as she worked on the mother's flank. "The cut is deep but missed any major blood vessels." "Another hour, though." She left the sentence unfinished. "And the cub?" Emily asked, helping to hold instruments while Injeri worked. "Will limp for a while, but should recover fully. Young ones heal remarkably fast." She glanced up at Emily, her expression unreadable. "Unlike some humans I know who take unnecessary risks." Emily accepted the rebuke with a nod. "I couldn't just watch them suffer." "There's a fine line between compassion and foolishness," Injeri replied, but her tone had softened. "Though I must admit, I've never seen anything quite like this. She should have attacked you." "Maybe she understood somehow," Emily said quietly, "that I was trying to help." Injeri's skeptical look said everything about what she thought of that theory. As they finished treatment, the decision was made to monitor the pair's recovery rather than relocate them. The lioness and cub were positioned carefully in the shade, tracking collars attached to monitor their movements once they awoke. "The drugs will wear off in about 40 minutes, Injeri explained as the team packed up. "We should be gone well before then." Emily nodded, but found herself reluctant to leave. Something about this encounter felt unfinished, as though a conversation had been started that needed proper closure. "5 more minutes," she requested. Injeri hesitated, then sighed. 5 minutes. Then we go." When the team retreated to a safe distance, Emily knelt once more beside the sedated cats. The lioness's breathing was deep and regular now, her massive paws occasionally twitching in drug-induced dreams. The cub lay curled against her side, its injured paw bandaged and propped carefully. "I don't know if you can hear me," Emily said softly, "but I'm going to find who did this. Who set that trap? They won't hurt another animal if I can help it." As if in response, the lioness's eyes fluttered half open, the drugs beginning to wear off faster than expected. Instead of the panic or aggression Emily anticipated, those amber eyes merely fixed on her with startling clarity. Emily remained perfectly still, aware that she should retreat, but unable to break the intense connection of their shared gaze. The lioness's eyes held no malice, no fear, just a profound awareness that seemed to transcend their separate worlds. After what seemed like an eternity, but was probably only seconds, the lioness slowly raised her head, still maintaining eye contact. With deliberate care, she positioned herself between Emily and the cub in a protective but not threatening posture. "I understand," Emily whispered. "He's safe with you now." The lioness blinked once, slowly, then turned her attention to her cub, gently nuzzling its small form. It was a clear dismissal. The interaction was over. Emily backed away gradually, never turning her back, until she reached the edge of the clearing wherein Jerry waited, eyes wide with professional amazement. "I've worked with lions for 12 years, the veterinarian said quietly as they walked back to the vehicles. "What just happened isn't in any textbook." Emily could only shake her head, the profound weight of the encounter settling over her like an invisible mantle. "I don't know," she admitted, but it felt important. As they drove away, Emily turned for one last look. At the edge of the clearing, just visible in the dappled shade, the lioness had risen to her feet. Before disappearing into the tall grass with her cub, she paused, her golden form illuminated by a shaft of sunlight breaking through the acacia canopy. For a brief moment, their eyes met once more across the distance. Then, with a flick of her tawny tail, she was gone, melting into the savannah like a ghost returning to its realm, leaving Emily with the unshakable feeling that this chapter of their story was far from over. 3 weeks passed since the rescue in the clearing. The rainy season had given way to drier days, transforming the landscape into a patchwork of green and gold. Emily found herself scanning the horizon more often than usual during her patrols, searching for a familiar golden silhouette among the waving grasses. On a humid Tuesday morning, she sat perched on a rocky outcrop, documenting a zebra migration with her field notebook. The radio beside her crackled occasionally with routine updates from other rangers. "Carter, you still at Observation Point Alpha?" Robert's voice broke through the static. "Affirmative," she replied, not taking her eyes off the magnificent striped procession below, counting approximately 350 zebra moving southwest toward the water hole. "Any sign of our collared friends?" Emily knew exactly which collared animals he meant. The lioness, now designated LF-217 in the park's tracking system but privately nicknamed Amber by Emily for her distinctive eyes, had become something of a legend among the ranger team. "Not today," she answered, ignoring the slight pang of disappointment. The tracking data showed both lions were healthy and moving normally through their territory, but Emily hadn't personally spotted them since the day of the rescue. As evening approached, Emily packed up her equipment and headed back to her Jeep. The African sunset painted the sky in breathtaking strokes of orange and purple, the kind of natural artistry that still left her awestruck even after 2 years in the Serengeti. She was about to start the engine when movement at the periphery of her vision caught her attention. About 70 yards away, a tawny form stood motionless atop a small rise, silhouetted against the darkening sky. Emily's breath caught in her throat. Slowly, deliberately, she reached for her binoculars and raised them to her eyes. The lioness stood majestically on the rise, her powerful shoulders and distinctive facial markings immediately recognizable. The tracking collar was visible around her neck, confirming her identity. At her feet, the cub, noticeably larger now, playfully pawed at a clump of grass. "Amber," Emily whispered, a smile spreading across her face. As if hearing her name across the distance, the lioness turned her head, her gaze connecting directly with Emily's. For several heartbeats, they observed each other, predator and human, each recognizing the other across the divide of species. Emily lowered her binoculars, wanting to see the magnificent animal with her naked eye, to experience the moment without barriers. The lioness remained in position, her stance relaxed yet alert, watching. "Hey there," Emily said softly, knowing her voice couldn't possibly carry across the distance, but feeling compelled to speak nonetheless. "Looking good, girl." The radio beside her burst to life. "Carter, what's your ETA back at base?" Storm system moving in from the east. The interruption broke the spell. When Emily looked back toward the rise, the lioness and her cub had vanished into the growing darkness. Back at the ranger station, Emily downloaded the day's tracking data onto the central computer. Jerry entered as she was examining the movement patterns. "Obsessing over your golden girl again?" the veterinarian asked with a knowing smile, setting down 2 steaming mugs of tea. Emily accepted the drink gratefully. "Just reviewing the data. Her movements have been interesting." Jerry leaned over to look at the screen. Unusual ranging pattern for a lioness with a cub that age. She's covering more territory than typical. And look at this." Emily pointed to several clusters of tracking points. "She's been returning repeatedly to these specific locations. The eastern one is near a water source. That makes sense," Jerry observed. "But this other one," She frowned, tapping the screen. That's only about 2 kilometers from your outpost, isn't it? Emily nodded slowly. 3 times in the past week. Their eyes met, a silent question passing between them. You don't think? And Jerry began, then shook her head. No, that's ridiculous. What's ridiculous? Marcus Okello, the station's senior ranger, asked as he entered the room, shaking rain from his jacket. At 45, with 20 years of experience in wildlife conservation across East Africa, Marcus had seen almost everything the bush could offer, but even he had been astounded by Emily's encounter with the lioness. Emily thinks her lion friend is keeping tabs on her, and Jerry explained with a small smile. Emily flushed slightly. I didn't say that exactly. Marcus studied the tracking data with narrowed eyes. Animals develop routines, patterns. Maybe there's good hunting in that area. Maybe, Emily agreed, but couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to it. The following morning, Emily woke before dawn. Unable to fall back asleep, she decided to start her patrol early. The air felt electric after the night's storm. The savannah revitalized and teeming with activity as nocturnal creatures returned to their daytime hideaways. Near an area of dense brush, Emily spotted fresh tracks in the mud, the distinctive paw prints of a large feline and a smaller one alongside. Her heart quickened as she knelt to examine them, noting their freshness in the soft earth. You were here, weren't you? She murmured, tracing the outline of the larger print with her finger. Why? As the weeks passed, these almost encounters became a pattern. Fresh tracks near her outpost in the morning. Distant sightings of the golden silhouette watching from ridgelines or acacia groves. Once, returning from a lengthy patrol after dark, Emily's flashlight beam caught a pair of reflective eyes observing her from just beyond the perimeter fence. By the time she grabbed her camera, they were gone. Do you think I'm imagining things? She asked in Jerry one evening, after describing yet another distant sighting. The veterinarian considered the question seriously. Science tells us that wild predators don't form attachments to humans. They don't feel gratitude or kinship with us. She paused, stirring her tea thoughtfully. But science also once told us animals don't feel grief, don't problem solve, don't dream. Maybe there are connections we don't yet understand. Emily nodded, grateful for her friend's open mind. That night, as she sat on the small porch of her quarters watching lightning flicker on the distant horizon, she felt a presence before she saw it. At the very edge of the compound's ambient light, just beyond the security fence, stood a now familiar golden form. Emily's heart pounded as she slowly stood. Amber, the lioness, remained still, only her tail moving in slow, deliberate sweeps. The cub was nowhere to be seen, unusual for this time of evening. For nearly 5 minutes, they maintained this strange vigil, human and lioness, observer and observed, each seemingly waiting for the other to make some definitive move. Then, with deliberate slowness, the lioness lowered herself to her haunches, settled onto the ground, and simply watched. Not hunting, not threatening, just present, as if keeping company across an impossible divide. Emily slowly sat back down on her porch step, maintaining eye contact. Okay, she whispered. I see you. And in that moment, something indefinable shifted between them, an acknowledgement that transcended the barrier between wild and tame, between human understanding and animal consciousness. Something had begun that neither of them fully comprehended. The transition from wet season to dry brought dramatic changes to the Serengeti. Waterholes shrank daily under the relentless sun, turning muddy and crowded. Tensions rose among the wildlife as resources dwindled. Prey animals became more vigilant, predators more desperate. It was the natural cycle of the savanna, brutal but necessary, culling the weak to ensure the survival of the strong. For the park rangers, it was the most challenging time of year. Animals ventured closer to human settlements seeking water, creating dangerous confrontations with local villagers. Poachers grew bolder, taking advantage of predictable animal movements around remaining water sources. Emily's patrol route had been extended to cover the northeastern sector, an area particularly vulnerable to incursions from organized poaching rings. The morning briefing had been tense, with Robert outlining a disturbing pattern of activity. Intelligence suggests we're dealing with something bigger than the usual opportunists, he explained, pointing to marked locations on the large wall map. Systematic intrusions, professional equipment. They're targeting high-value species, rhino primarily, but taking elephants and lions when the opportunity presents. Marcus added grimly. 3 rhino carcasses found in the Mara section last month. Clean work. Horns removed with precision cutting tools, minimal blood trails. Any leads on who's behind it? Emily asked, studying the incident markers clustered around the park boundaries. Local sources mention Chinese buyers working through Tanzanian middlemen, Robert replied. But that's nothing new. What's concerning is the sophistication level. These aren't village poachers with old rifles. The briefing shifted to administrative matters, but Emily's attention remained on the map, mentally calculating distances and patterns. A troubling realization formed. The poaching incidents created a rough semicircle moving steadily toward Amber's current territory. After the meeting, she approached Robert privately. I'd like permission to set up a mobile observation post near the McAuliffe Ridge. The tracking data shows our collared lioness frequenting that area. If poachers are moving in that direction, Robert studied her thoughtfully. This about protecting your special friend. Emily kept her expression professional. It's about protecting a valuable research subject and her offspring. You've seen in Jerry's reports, the interaction we've documented is unprecedented. Fair enough, he conceded. But you'll need backup. Take Marcus or Daniel with you. I work better alone on observation posts, she countered. Less human scent, less noise. Non-negotiable, Carter, Robert said firmly. The security situation is deteriorating. No solo extended deployments right now. Before Emily could argue further, the radio crackled urgently. Base, this is Patrol 4. We've got researchers under threat at Lakeside Point. Elephant herd charging their vehicles. Robert grabbed the radio. Situation assessment. Bull elephant, agitated state. 2 research vehicles pinned against the embankment. No injuries reported yet, but they're in a bad position. How many researchers? Robert demanded. 6 total. Princeton University research team. They were collecting water samples when the herd approached. Robert's expression darkened. Carter, take Marcus and get out there. The rest of the morning patrols can continue as scheduled. 20 minutes later, Emily and Marcus were speeding toward Lakeside Point in their patrol vehicle, dust billowing behind them. The research team's predicament wasn't entirely surprising. Water shortages made elephants increasingly territorial around remaining water sources. Princeton team, Marcus muttered as they drove. That's Dr. Abernathy's group, studying water microbiology. They should know better than to approach a water hole this time of year without proper security. Researchers get focused on their data and forget where they are. Emily replied, negotiating a particularly rough stretch of track. I've seen it before. As they crested a rise overlooking the lake, the situation came into clear view. 2 white SUVs with university markings were backed against a steep embankment, effectively cornered. About 50 yards away, a massive bull elephant stood with ears extended, trunk raised, classic threat posture. Behind him, several females with calves watched warily. That's Scarface, Marcus said, recognizing the distinctive torn right ear of the bull. He's been aggressive since poachers wounded him 2 years ago. Hates vehicles, especially white ones. Emily assessed the situation quickly. We need to create a diversion, give them an escape route. She reached for the vehicle's siren switch. Wait, Marcus cautioned. Short bursts only. Too much noise could escalate him or panic the females. Emily nodded, keying her radio. Research team, this is Ranger Carter. We're on the ridge to your north. When I sound our siren, start your engines, but don't move until I give the signal. Understood, came a woman's tense reply. Please hurry. He's already charged once. Just stay calm and avoid sudden movements, Emily instructed. Positioning their vehicle on the ridge where the elephant could clearly see them, Emily sounded a 2-second siren burst. As expected, Scarface swung toward this new threat, his massive head rising with renewed aggression. Come on, big guy, Emily muttered. Focus on us. She activated the siren again, this time with a longer pulse. The bull elephant took several steps toward them, uncertain about which threat to address. Now we need to draw him up the ridge, Marcus said. Give them a clear path to the south access road. Emily put the vehicle in reverse, maintaining visual contact with the agitated elephant. Research team, start engines, but stay in position, she radioed. The sound of engines from the trapped vehicles further divided the bull's attention. He shifted his weight from side to side, clearly conflicted. "Get ready to move when I say," Emily instructed the researchers. "Head directly south, normal speed, no sudden acceleration." With Scarface's attention split, Emily executed the riskiest part of the plan. She drove forward, down the ridge toward the elephant, then swerved to the north, away from the research team's escape route. The bull immediately focused on this direct challenge to his dominance. "Now," Emily radioed. "Move out calmly, southern route." As the research vehicles began carefully extracting themselves, Emily led Scarface on a calculated pursuit, staying just close enough to maintain his interest without provoking a full charge. Marcus gripped the dashboard tensely. "He's gaining," he warned as the massive animal picked up speed. "Almost there," Emily replied, eyes flicking between the rearview mirror where she could see the researchers making their escape and the increasingly close bull elephant. When the research vehicles cleared the danger zone, Emily accelerated up the northern ridge, finally putting enough distance between them and the frustrated elephant. Scarface stopped at the base of the ridge, trumpeting his displeasure but unwilling to continue the chase up the steep incline. "Research team, confirm your status," Emily radioed, her heart still pounding. "All clear, Rangers. Heading back to base camp now. Thank you." As the adrenaline subsided, Emily and Marcus watched the elephant herd from their safe vantage point. Scarface gradually returned to his family group, his aggression slowly dissipating. "Nice work," Marcus acknowledged, though Robert would have had a fit if he'd seen that maneuver. Emily smiled slightly. "Sometimes you have to improvise." They were preparing to return to base when Emily's satellite phone rang, unusual for field operations. It was Robert, his voice tight with urgency. "Change of plans. We've got a more serious situation developing. Suspected poachers spotted entering the restricted zone near Kanjo Canyon. Heavily armed. I've called in tactical support from the anti-poaching unit, but they're an hour out at minimum. You're the closest team." Emily and Marcus exchanged concerned glances. "What's our role?" Emily asked. "Observation only," Robert emphasized. "Track their movements, gather intelligence, but maintain absolute distance. These aren't amateurs." Multiple vehicles, military-grade weapons reported. "Understood," Emily confirmed, already plotting the fastest route to Kanjo Canyon in her mind. "One more thing," Robert added grimly. "This location is less than 3 kilometers from your lioness's last reported position." Emily felt her stomach drop. "We're on our way." As they sped toward the canyon, the brief satisfaction of the successful elephant intervention faded, replaced by a growing sense of dread. The threat was no longer abstract lines on a map. It was now a direct, immediate danger to Amber and her cub. And Emily was racing against time to prevent another tragedy in the unforgiving savanna she'd sworn to protect. The terrain grew progressively rougher as Emily and Marcus approached Kanjo Canyon. Ancient volcanic activity had created a labyrinthine landscape of steep-walled ravines and sudden drops, ideal for ambushes, both natural and human-designed. Emily navigated the Jeep carefully through the narrow passages, mindful of the loose shale that could send them sliding into a ravine with one wrong turn. "Cut the engine," Marcus instructed as they rounded a bend. "Listen," Emily complied, and they sat in sudden silence, straining to hear anything beyond the tick of the cooling engine and the distant cry of an eagle. Then it came, the faint but unmistakable sound of vehicle engines echoing through the canyon walls. "Northwest," Marcus whispered, pointing. 2, maybe 3 vehicles. Emily nodded, grabbing her field binoculars. "We need higher ground for proper observation." They abandoned the Jeep in a concealed position and proceeded on foot, scaling a steep ridge that offered a commanding view of the canyon system. The climb was grueling in the afternoon heat, loose rocks clattering down the slope with each careful step. At the ridge top, they dropped to their stomachs and crawled the final few meters. The panorama below revealed the disturbing scene Robert had warned them about: 3 camouflage-painted vehicles moving in tactical formation through the canyon floor. Even from this distance, Emily could see the distinctive silhouettes of assault rifles carried by the men walking alongside the lead vehicle. "Definitely not tourists," Marcus muttered grimly, adjusting his binoculars. "I count 8 individuals, military-style organization. Those are M4 carbines, not your standard poaching equipment." Emily focused her own binoculars, stomach tightening as she recognized other details. Look at their gear: night vision mounts, tactical vests. This isn't an opportunistic hunt. They're heading toward the eastern water hole, Marcus observed, one of the few remaining active sources in this sector. Emily felt a chill despite the heat. The satellite tracking placed Amber and her cub less than a kilometer from that water hole yesterday evening. For 20 tense minutes, they documented the poachers' movements, photographing vehicles and equipment with their long-range cameras. Emily radioed the information back to Robert in coded bursts, using the standard anti-poaching protocols to avoid interception. "Tactical team is 30 minutes out," Robert replied. "Maintain your position and continue observation. Do not engage." The poaching party halted near a narrow passage that opened into the broader plain containing the water hole. With practiced efficiency, they established what appeared to be an ambush position, setting snares and positioning shooters at strategic points. "They're creating a choke point," Marcus analyzed, his voice tight with professional disgust. "Any animal coming to drink will be trapped in the crossfire. No chance of escape." Emily nodded grimly. "And in this drought, everything has to drink eventually." As if confirming their fears, the lead poacher raised his hand, signaling his team to silence. Through her binoculars, Emily could see him pointing toward movement at the eastern edge of the plain, the unmistakable tawny forms of lions approaching the water hole. Her breath caught as recognition hit. Even without seeing the tracking collar, she knew immediately it was Amber. The distinctive movement pattern, the protective positioning relative to her cub, now significantly larger but still not fully grown, were unmistakable. "It's them," she whispered, her knuckles white around the binoculars. Marcus glanced at her, concern etched across his weathered features. "Emily, I know," she cut him off. "We can't intervene directly, but we need to warn them off somehow." As they watched, helpless on their ridge, the lioness cautiously approached the water. Her behavior showed her characteristic intelligence, testing the air, scanning the surroundings, positioning herself between potential threats and her offspring. But she couldn't detect the hidden poachers with their downwind position and carefully concealed scent. The tactical team won't make it in time, Emily realized, calculating distances and timing with growing desperation. Marcus keyed his radio. "Base, this is Okello. Targets have set ambush at Eastern Waterhole. Research subject LF-217 and Cub are approaching the trap. Request permission for diversionary action." Robert's response was immediate and firm. "Negative. These individuals are heavily armed and dangerous. Maintain position. Tactical team, ETA, 25 minutes. Emily's mind raced through options, each more desperate than the last. The lioness was now at the water's edge, lapping cautiously while her cub waited in the taller grass. The poachers remained motionless, weapons trained, waiting for the perfect shot. "I can't just watch this happen," Emily muttered, inching backward from the ridge line. "What are you doing?" Marcus hissed, grabbing her arm. "Creating a diversion," she replied, pulling free. "Stay here, maintain observation. If I'm not back in 20 minutes, tell the tactical team I headed northwest." "Emily, this is suicide," Marcus protested. "These aren't amateur poachers. They're professionals with military training." "I'm not engaging them," she assured him, already retrieving emergency flares from her pack. "I'm just going to make enough noise to spook everything away from that water hole." Before Marcus could raise further objections, Emily was sliding back down the ridge face, using the rough terrain for cover. Her plan was simple but dangerous. Circle around to the far side of the plain, deploy flares to simulate anti-poaching patrol activity, and hope the commotion would drive both lions and poachers away from the area. The route took her through a dried riverbed that offered concealment but slowed her progress considerably. Every second counted. Each time she glanced up at the ridge where Marcus maintained his observation position, his tense body language told her the situation at the water hole remained unchanged. Finally reaching a position opposite the poacher's ambush point, Emily prepared 3 emergency flares. The timing had to be perfect. Too soon, and the lions might run directly into the poacher's position. Too late, and the shots would already be fired. Drawing a deep breath, she ignited the first flare and hurled it high over the plain, its intense red light arcing through the air before landing in open ground between the water hole and the poacher's position. Immediately, She fired the second flare in the opposite direction. The effect was instantaneous. The lioness's head snapped up, water dripping from her muzzle as she spotted the first flare. With a warning growl to her cub, she retreated from the water's edge, moving away from both the flares and, thankfully, the poacher's position. Through a gap in the rocks, Emily could see the poacher's operation thrown into confusion. The leader was gesturing angrily, clearly believing they were under surveillance from park anti-poaching units. Two men quickly began collecting their snares while others provided covering fire positions. Emily allowed herself a moment of relief. The immediate danger to Amber had passed, but her own situation had grown precarious. To return to Marcus, she would need to cross more exposed terrain, potentially visible to the now alert poachers. She had just begun moving toward a more protected route when the ground beneath her right foot suddenly gave way. The dried riverbed, undermined by the recent rains, collapsed into a hidden sinkhole. Emily felt herself falling, tumbling amid loose soil and rocks before landing hard on the stone floor of a narrow cavern some 12 feet below the surface. Pain shot through her left ankle as she tried to stand. Not broken, she thought, but badly sprained at minimum. Worse, her radio had been damaged in the fall, the casing cracked and the power light dark. Above her, the opening to the surface looked impossibly distant. "Marcus," she called, hoping her voice might carry to the ridge. But the canyon walls absorbed sound, her cries echoing uselessly in the confined space. Then a new sound reached her, the unmistakable rumble of vehicle engines, growing louder. The poachers were on the move, and their route would take them directly over her position. Emily pressed herself against the cavern wall, praying they wouldn't spot the disturbed earth marking her fall. The engines grew deafening, then began to fade as the vehicles passed by. Emily allowed herself a shaky breath, then froze as a new sound reached her ears. The distinctive low growl of a big cat, somewhere above. Her blood ran cold as a tawny face appeared at the opening of the sinkhole, amber eyes reflecting the late afternoon sun as they stared directly down at her. Amber had found her, but in her current predicament, Emily couldn't tell if that was salvation or the final cruel twist in an already desperate situation. Emily pressed herself against the cool stone wall of the sinkhole, her breathing shallow as she stared up at the lioness silhouetted against the dying light. Amber's face filled the opening, ears alert, amber eyes fixed intently on the trapped human below. The rumble of the poachers' vehicles had faded into the distance, but a new danger now literally loomed above. "Hey, girl," Emily whispered, her voice barely audible even to herself. Instinct told her to appear non-threatening, to make herself small, though the rational part of her brain acknowledged the futility. If Amber chose to see her as prey now, there was nowhere to run, nowhere to hide in this natural prison. The lioness continued her silent assessment, occasionally shifting position, causing small cascades of dirt to rain down into the hole. Each time Emily moved to avoid the debris, pain shot through her injured ankle, drawing involuntary gasps that made the great cat's ears twitch in response. Minutes stretched interminably. Emily's tactical training cycled through survival options, none promising. The sinkhole walls were too sheer to climb with an injured ankle. Her radio was shattered. Marcus would be searching, but in the maze of canyons and with poachers still in the area, a rescue could take hours. And all the while, Amber watched. "I could use some help here," Emily finally said aloud, surprising herself with the steadiness in her voice. "If you've got any ideas." As if in response, the lioness abruptly disappeared from the opening. The sudden absence was somehow more unnerving than her presence had been. Silence descended, broken only by the distant cry of birds settling for the evening. "Great," Emily muttered to herself, shifting to find a more comfortable position against the wall. "Now I'm talking to cats." She had just begun assessing which items in her pack might help construct a makeshift climbing aid when a shower of dirt and rocks suddenly poured from above. Instinctively covering her head, Emily looked up to see not just Amber, but also her nearly grown cub peering down at her, both cats pawing at the edge of the hole, dislodging more soil with each movement. "No, stop," Emily called out, shielding her eyes from the falling debris. "You're making it worse." But the lions continued their strange behavior, the cub now mimicking its mother's actions, both cats digging at the rim of the sinkhole as if. Are they trying to enlarge the opening? Emily wondered aloud, bewilderment temporarily overshadowing her pain and fear. The digging continued for several minutes, widening the hole's circumference and creating a cascade of earth that formed a rough, sloping pile against one wall of the pit. As Emily watched in astonishment, the steep sides of the sinkhole were gradually transformed into a precarious but potentially climbable incline. When the cascade of dirt finally settled, Amber's face reappeared at the rim. The lioness made a soft chuffing sound, unlike anything Emily had heard from her before. Was that an invitation? Testing her weight on the injured ankle, Emily found she could stand, albeit painfully. The dirt pile now reached more than halfway up the sinkhole wall, creating an unstable but navigable slope. With careful movements, using her good leg to bear most of her weight, Emily began to climb. The loose soil shifted treacherously beneath her. Twice she slid backward, gasping as her injured ankle twisted. On the third attempt, she drove her fingers deep into the dirt, creating handholds to pull herself upward. Near the top, the climb became nearly vertical. Emily paused, muscles trembling with exertion, uncertain if she could make the final push to freedom. As if sensing her dilemma, Amber reappeared at the edge, closer than before. For a heart-stopping moment, Emily thought the lioness might reach down and drag her out, a terrifying prospect given those powerful jaws. Instead, Amber simply maintained her position, amber eyes locked with Emily's as if willing her to complete the climb. With a final surge of effort, Emily lunged upward, fingers scrabbling at the edge. She managed to hook her elbows over the rim, then drag herself the final few inches to solid ground. Collapsing on the earth, gasping for breath, she found herself face to face with the lioness, barely 3 feet separating them. The cub stood slightly behind its mother, curious but cautious. "Thank you," Emily breathed, remaining perfectly still despite every human instinct screaming at her to back away. Amber's expression, if such a term could be applied to a wild predator, seemed to hold neither aggression nor fear, only a focused intensity that had characterized their strange relationship from the beginning. For several breathless moments, the tableau held, woman and lioness, each studying the other across an impossible divide of species and understanding. Then, with deliberate slowness, Amber turned away. The cub hesitated, clearly torn between curiosity about the human and loyalty to its mother. A soft growl from Amber decided the matter. The younger lion reluctantly followed, glancing back repeatedly until both disappeared into the gathering dusk. Emily released a shuddering breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "This is definitely not in the ranger training manual," she whispered to herself. The dwindling light reminded her of her precarious situation, injured, separated from her partner, with armed poachers in the vicinity. Using the last of her phone's battery, she managed to send a single text message with her GPS coordinates to the ranger base before the screen went dark. Dragging herself to the shelter of a rocky overhang, Emily fashioned a crude splint for her ankle and settled in to wait, alert for any sounds of either rescue or danger. The stars emerged one by one in the deepening African night, brilliant and indifferent to the dramas unfolding beneath their eternal watch. An hour passed, then another. The temperature dropped rapidly, as it always did in the savannah after sunset. Emily pulled her jacket tighter, fighting off the drowsiness that accompanied the pain and cold. Falling asleep here could be fatal. A sudden rustling in the brush sent her hand to her sidearm. Emily held her breath, straining to identify the source of the sound. A flashlight beam cut through the darkness, followed by a familiar voice. "Emily, Emily, do you copy?" "Marcus," she called out, relief flooding through her. "Over here." Within moments, the search team had reached her position, Marcus leading, with 2 anti-poaching unit officers flanking him, rifles at the ready. "Thank God," Marcus breathed, kneeling beside her. "When you didn't return and didn't respond to radio calls." He shook his head, the unfinished sentence conveying more than words could. "The poachers?" Emily asked as a medic examined her ankle. "Gone for now. The tactical team is tracking them. They abandoned their position after your flare display." Marcus's expression hardened. "Reckless stunt, by the way." Robert's furious. "I know," Emily acknowledged. "But I couldn't just watch." "Yes, your special lion friend," Marcus sighed. "Speaking of which, We picked up some very strange readings from her collar. According to the GPS, she circled this exact location for over an hour after the poachers left. Emily met his gaze steadily. She found me, Marcus. I fell into a sinkhole, and she and her cub. She hesitated, knowing how implausible the truth would sound. She what? Marcus prompted. They dug out the side of the hole, created a slope I could climb. They helped me escape. Marcus stared at her for a long moment, then glanced at the medic, clearly wondering if Emily was delirious from pain or exposure. It's true, she insisted. I know how it sounds, but let's get you back to base, Marcus interrupted gently. Dr. Curia needs to look at that ankle, and you need rest. As they carefully helped her to the waiting vehicle, Emily looked back at the darkened landscape. Somewhere out there, a lioness and her cub moved through the night. Predators by nature, yet something more, something that defied easy categorization or scientific explanation. I owe her my life, Emily said softly, more to herself than to her rescuers. Twice now, the headlights illuminated a pair of reflective eyes watching from a distant ridge, there for just a moment, then gone like a golden ghost melting into the African night. No one else noticed, and Emily didn't point them out. Some connections, she was beginning to understand, were too profound, too inexplicable for others to comprehend. Some bonds transcended species, logic, and science, forming instead in that ancient, wordless space where human and wild briefly touch across an eternal divide. Absolutely not. Robert's voice echoed through the small medical office, his normally composed demeanor giving way to rare, unfiltered anger. You're grounded, Carter. No field duty until that ankle heals completely. 3 days had passed since the incident at Canjo Canyon. Emily sat on the examination table, her left leg extended with an ice pack wrapped around her swollen ankle. Dr. and Jerry Curia stood nearby, clipboard in hand, her expression caught between professional detachment and personal concern. The sprain is grade 2, Jerry explained, addressing both Emily and Robert. No complete tear, but significant damage to the ligaments. 6 to 8 weeks for full recovery. Limited weight bearing for at least the first 2. That's too long, Emily protested. The poachers are still out there. They'll be back. Let the anti-poaching unit handle them, Robert countered. That's what they're trained for. Your job right now is to heal. Emily leaned forward, wincing as the movement shifted her injured limb. Robert, I need to be part of this. That team of researchers, they're still vulnerable. And Amber. Robert interrupted, brows raised. You're on a first-name basis with LF-217 now. Emily caught in Jerry's subtle headshake, a warning not to push too hard. The lioness, Emily corrected, represents a unique research opportunity. Her unusual behavior is precisely what concerns me, Robert said, pacing the small room. I've read your report, Emily. And Marcus's. You're attributing human-like reasoning and altruism to a wild predator. It's not just unscientific, it's dangerous. I know what I experienced, Emily replied, her voice quiet but firm. Robert sighed, his anger giving way to genuine concern. I don't doubt you believe what you're reporting. But trauma, isolation, dehydration, they can all affect perception. The mind seeks patterns, explanations, connections. He stopped pacing, meeting her gaze directly, especially when those connections align with what we want to believe. The implication stung, but Emily bit back her immediate defensive response. She needed to pick her battles carefully. What about the Princeton research team? She asked instead. They're still planning to continue their water sampling project in the eastern sector. I've assigned Marcus and Daniel to escort duty, Robert replied. They'll have additional security from the Conservancy Rangers as well. Emily nodded reluctantly. When do they head out? Tomorrow morning. Final preparations happening today. Robert checked his watch. Which reminds me, I'm due at the coordination meeting. Dr. Curia, I'm entrusting my ranger to your care. Make sure she follows medical orders. After he left, Jerry handed Emily a bottle of anti-inflammatory medication and a pair of crutches. He's worried about you, the veterinarian said quietly. We all are. I'm fine, Emily insisted, awkwardly positioning the crutches under her arms. Jerry's expression softened. You know, in my culture, we have stories, legends about people who form connections with wild creatures. Spirit animals, guardians. My grandmother would say you've been chosen. Emily looked up, surprised. I thought you were the voice of scientific skepticism around here. I contain multitudes, and Jerry replied with a small smile. Science explains much, but not everything. She helped Emily down from the examination table. Just promise me you won't do anything foolish while that ankle heals. Define foolish, Emily quipped, testing her weight on the crutches. Emily, and Jerry's tone turned serious. Those poachers aren't just after trophies. They're organized, well-armed. Professional criminals. Don't underestimate the danger. Emily nodded soberly. I won't. The rest of the day passed slowly, confinement to the base camp chafing worse than the ankle pain. Emily spent hours reviewing satellite imagery and tracking data, focusing particularly on Amber's movements since the canyon incident. The pattern was striking. The lioness had maintained a patrol route that kept her territory overlapping with the Eastern Water Research sites. By evening, Emily had formulated a plan that, while technically adhering to Robert's orders, skirted dangerously close to insubordination. She wouldn't participate in field operations directly, but she could establish a monitoring position at Observation Point Echo, an elevated blind overlooking the eastern waterhole where the research team would be working. With her ankle immobilized, she could still maintain radio contact, track wildlife movements, and provide early warning if necessary. The following morning, Emily rose before dawn. Moving quietly despite the cumbersome crutches, she packed essential supplies: water, high-energy rations, binoculars, her personal satellite phone, and a flare gun. Transportation presented the biggest challenge, but she'd already arranged a solution. Nadia, one of the maintenance crew who owed Emily a favor for helping her son secure an internship, had agreed to drive her to the observation point before reporting for her regular shift. Are you sure about this? Nadia asked as they approached the turnoff to the observation blind. Mr. Robert, he will not be happy. I'm not violating orders, Emily replied, the justification sounding weak even to her own ears. I'm just observing from a fixed position. No field patrol, no tracking. Nadia looked unconvinced but didn't argue further. I will check on you at end of my shift. 6 o'clock. If you need to return sooner, use the radio. Thanks, Nadia. I owe you one. You owe me two now, the older woman corrected with a wry smile. The observation blind was a simple but effective structure, a raised platform with waist-high walls and a camouflage canopy, positioned to overlook the water hole while remaining hidden from wildlife below. With some difficulty, Emily hoisted herself up the access ladder, careful to keep weight off her injured ankle. Once settled, she arranged her equipment methodically. Through her binoculars, she could clearly see the area where the Princeton team would be working, a series of shallow pools connected to the main water hole, perfect for collecting microbial samples. At 7:30 a.m., right on schedule, 2 research vehicles appeared, followed by the ranger escort, Marcus driving the lead vehicle with Daniel bringing up the rear. Even from this distance, Emily could recognize the researchers' leader, Dr. Catherine Abernathy, her distinctive white blonde hair visible as she directed her team's setup. For the next several hours, Emily observed the methodical work of the researchers, occasionally checking wildlife movements in the surrounding area. The radio crackled with routine updates from Marcus to base. Everything proceeded normally until shortly after noon, when the first warning signs appeared. A herd of impala, grazing peacefully near the far perimeter, suddenly froze, then bolted in unison. Through her binoculars, Emily scanned for predators, but saw nothing. The researchers, absorbed in their work, hadn't noticed the subtle shift in the savanna's atmosphere. Emily reached for her radio. Marcus, possible situation developing. Impala showing flight response, northwest quadrant. Copy that, came the immediate reply. What trigger did you observe? None visual, Emily admitted. But something spooked them. Understood. Wheel, Marcus's voice cut off abruptly. Marcus, Emily prompted, unease growing. Do you copy? After several seconds of silence, Marcus's voice returned, pitched lower. Multiple vehicles approaching from the north. Not Park Service. Moving into defensive positions. Have the researchers pack up immediately. Emily's heart rate spiked as she swung her binoculars toward the northern approach. 3 vehicles, the same camouflage-painted trucks from the canyon incident, were advancing rapidly toward the water hole, dust clouds billowing behind them. Through the powerful lenses, Emily could see armed men preparing to disembark even as the vehicles continued moving, a military-style assault tactic. Marcus and Daniel had positioned their ranger vehicles to provide cover for the researchers, who were now hurriedly packing their equipment. "This is Ranger Okello." Marcus's voice came over the emergency channel. "We have armed hostiles approaching the Eastern Water Hole research site, requesting immediate tactical support." "Copy that," Robert's voice replied. "Tactical team deploying now. ETA 18 minutes. Extract the researchers immediately." Emily watched helplessly as the situation deteriorated below. The poachers had spread out in a flanking maneuver, effectively cutting off the most direct escape route. Marcus and Daniel, both armed but outgunned, were attempting to shepherd the researchers into the vehicles while maintaining defensive positions. What happened next unfolded with nightmarish clarity through Emily's binoculars. One of the researchers, a young man Emily didn't recognize, panicked and broke from the group, running toward what he perceived as safety. A poacher raised his rifle, tracking the fleeing figure. "No!" Emily gasped, though no one could hear her. The crack of the rifle shot echoed across the plain. The researcher stumbled but didn't fall, a miss, or perhaps just a warning shot. Marcus immediately returned fire, providing cover as Daniel rushed to retrieve the stranded team member. The brief exchange escalated into a full firefight. The researchers finally managed to pile into one vehicle, while Marcus and Daniel provided covering fire from the second. They began a fighting retreat, working their way toward the southern exit route where the terrain provided more cover. Emily keyed her radio. "Base, this is Carter. Situation critical at Eastern Waterhole. Research team extraction in progress under fire. Relay to tactical team. Hostiles are positioned to cut off the south exit." "Carter." Robert's voice held momentary confusion before hardening to anger. "What the hell are you doing in the field?" Not now, Robert." Emily cut him off. "The research team is heading into an ambush. The poachers have a blocking position at the canyon mouth." A tense silence followed. Then Robert's professional instincts overrode his anger. "Understood." Relaying to tactical. "Stay in position and continue reporting." The vehicles below had almost reached the canyon entrance when Emily noticed new movement at the eastern perimeter of her view field. At first, she thought more poachers were arriving, but the golden forms moving with astonishing speed through the tall grass were unmistakable. "Lions," she breathed, instantly recognizing Amber's distinctive form leading a smaller figure, her nearly grown cub. The timing could not have been worse. The research vehicles were now caught between the poachers ahead and the approaching lions behind. If the cats charged the already panicked researchers. But Amber wasn't moving toward the vehicles. Instead, she and her cub were racing on an intercept course with the poachers blocking position, approaching from the opposite side where the humans' attention was focused on the canyon mouth. Emily watched in astonishment as events unfolded below. Just as Marcus's vehicle reached the narrow passage, apparently driving into the poacher's trap, Amber and her cub burst from the grass directly into the poacher's position. The surprise was total. Men shouted, scrambling to reorient their weapons as nearly 400 pounds of predator crashed into their formation. The diversion created the critical opening the Rangers needed. Marcus accelerated through the gap, the research vehicle close behind, as the poacher's attention was split between the unexpected feline assault and their escaping quarry. Emily's relief was short-lived. Through her binoculars, she saw one of the poachers regain his composure and raise his rifle, taking deliberate aim at Amber. The lioness was fully exposed, having positioned herself between the humans and her cub. What happened next seemed to unfold in slow motion. The rifle cracked. Amber's body jerked violently as the round struck her shoulder. Yet instead of retreating, she charged directly at the shooter, a golden blur of fury and protective instinct. The man fired again, frantically. A second impact, this one driving the lioness to her knees. Still, she struggled forward, allowing her cub to retreat to safety. A third shot rang out. Amber collapsed completely. "No!" Emily screamed, the sound torn from her throat. The poachers were regrouping, the leader gesturing toward Amber's fallen form, likely recognizing the research collar and the trophy value it represented. Before they could approach, however, the distant sound of helicopter rotors changed the calculation. The tactical response team was arriving. After a brief consultation, the poachers abandoned their position, rushing back to their vehicles and speeding away from the approaching aircraft. Within minutes, they had disappeared into the maze of canyons, leaving behind only dust clouds and a golden form lying motionless on the blood-stained earth. Emily's hands shook as she radioed for help. Base, emergency, emergency. Collared lioness LF-217 down at the canyon entrance. Multiple gunshot wounds. Need veterinary assistance immediately. Without waiting for acknowledgement, she grabbed her crutches and began the painful descent from the observation blind. Robert's orders, her injured ankle, personal safety, none of it mattered now. Only reaching Amber in time. The distance to the canyon entrance was less than half a kilometer, but it might as well have been a marathon. Emily pushed forward on her crutches, each swing causing fresh pain to shoot through her ankle, each breath burning in her lungs. By the time she reached the scene, the tactical helicopter was circling overhead. Amber lay where she had fallen, blood pooling beneath her golden coat. Her cub had returned, circling anxiously, growling at the approaching human despite their previous encounters. "It's okay," Emily gasped, dropping her crutches and half-crawling the final distance to Amber's side. "I'm here to help." The lioness's eyes were open but clouded with pain. Her breathing came in shallow, irregular gasps. Emily quickly assessed the wounds, one to the left shoulder, another to the flank, and a third, most concerning, to the chest. The beautiful animal was dying before her eyes. "Stay with me," Emily pleaded, gently placing her hands on either side of the massive head. "Help is coming. Just stay with me." Amber's amber eyes focused briefly on Emily's face. A soft sound, almost a purr, rumbled from the dying cat's chest. Recognition, perhaps, or simply the last reflex of a fading consciousness. The cub approached cautiously, torn between fear of the human and concern for its mother. Emily made no move to stop it as it pressed against Amber's side, making distressed vocalizations that needed no translation. Minutes passed like hours. Emily maintained pressure on the worst of the wounds, knowing it was likely futile but unable to simply watch the magnificent creature bleed out. She spoke continuously, words of encouragement, of gratitude, of desperate hope. Whether for Amber's benefit or her own, she couldn't say. The sound of approaching vehicles finally broke the trance. Jerry's medical transport skidded to a halt nearby, the veterinarian leaping out with her emergency kit before the vehicle had fully stopped. "Emily," she called, rushing toward them. "Are you?" The question died on her lips as she took in the scene. Emily kneeling beside the injured lioness, hands bloodied, the cub now standing protectively near both of them. Without another word, Jerry dropped to her knees beside them and began working, her movements quick and precise as she assessed vital signs and prepared medications. 3 gunshot wounds, Emily reported mechanically. Breathing shallow and irregular. Pulse weak. Blood loss significant. Jerry nodded, already administering emergency medications. "The helicopter is bringing in the full medical team. We need to stabilize her for transport." More vehicles arrived. Rangers, the tactical team, Robert. Emily was vaguely aware of someone calling her name, of hands trying to pull her away from Amber's side. She resisted, maintaining her position until Jerry gently intervened. "Emily, I need space to work," the veterinarian said firmly. "Let me save her." Only then did Emily allow herself to be moved aside. As the medical team swarmed around Amber, applying pressure bandages and setting up a transfusion, Emily found herself face to face with the cub. The young lion stood trembling, confused by the sudden activity surrounding its mother. "She's a fighter," Emily told it softly, speaking as if the animal could understand every word. "She saved both of us. Now we're going to save her." For a heartbeat that seemed to stretch into infinity, the cub's eyes met hers, young, frightened, yet somehow trusting. Then, as the medical team prepared Amber for transport to the Wildlife Medical Center, the young lion retreated into the tall grass, watching from a distance as its mother was carefully lifted onto a stretcher. "Will she make it?" Emily asked Jerry as they loaded Amber into the medical transport. The veterinarian's expression was grave but determined. "I don't know, but I promise you this. She'll have every chance we can give her." As the vehicle pulled away, Emily finally acknowledged her own exhaustion and pain. Her ankle had swollen to twice its normal size, and her hands were covered in Amber's blood. Robert stood nearby, his expression unreadable. "You disobeyed direct orders," he said quietly. "I did. You risked your health, your career." "Yes." A long pause followed. Then, unexpectedly, Robert extended his hand to help her up. "And you probably saved 6 researchers and 2 rangers in the process," he admitted. "Not to mention that extraordinary animal." Emily accepted his help, wincing as she put weight on her crutches. "Does this mean I'm not fired?" A ghost of a smile touched Robert's lips. "Let's discuss your employment status after we know if your lioness friend survives. And after you've had that ankle properly examined, again." As they drove back to base, Emily gazed out the window at the passing savannah. Somewhere out there, a young lion moved alone through the gathering dusk, its world suddenly, drastically altered. She knew exactly how that felt. "Hang on, Amber," she whispered to the darkening landscape. "Just hang on." A cool morning breeze stirred the canvas walls of Emily's tent as dawn crept over the Serengeti. 6 weeks had passed since that fateful day at the canyon. 6 weeks of recovery, rehabilitation, and reflection. Her ankle, though still mildly tender, had healed enough for her to be cleared for limited field duty. She flexed it experimentally as she laced up her boots, satisfied with the increased range of motion. Outside, the camp was already bustling with activity. A visiting documentary team from National Geographic had arrived yesterday, drawn by the remarkable story that had spread far beyond the boundaries of the park. Emily had been reluctant to speak on camera, but Robert had insisted. Positive publicity meant funding, and funding meant better resources for anti-poaching efforts. "Morning," Jerry called, approaching with 2 steaming mugs of coffee. She handed one to Emily before settling beside her on the wooden bench overlooking the savannah. "Ready for the big expedition today?" Emily nodded, taking a grateful sip of the strong brew. "As ready as I'll ever be." "Any updates from the tracking data?" "Still in the same general territory," Jerry replied. "Both signals strong and showing normal movement patterns." The reference to both signals still gave Emily a small thrill of amazement. Against all medical odds, Amber had survived her gunshot wounds. The surgery had been complex and harrowing. One bullet had lodged dangerously close to her heart, another had shattered her left shoulder blade, and the third had torn through muscle tissue in her flank. For 3 days after the operation, Amber had hovered between life and death in the park's wildlife medical facility. Emily had remained by her side almost constantly, sleeping on a cot beside the recovery enclosure, talking softly to the sedated lioness during the critical hours. "You're the most stubborn patient I've ever had," Jerry had commented on the 4th day, reviewing Amber's improving vital signs with barely concealed astonishment. "Most lions with these injuries wouldn't have survived the transport, let alone the surgery." "She's not most lions," Emily had replied simply. The recovery had been slow and methodical. As Amber gradually regained her strength, the question of reintroduction to the wild became increasingly pressing. Her cub, now technically a young adult male at nearly 2 years old, had remained in the vicinity of the medical center, occasionally visible at the perimeter fence, as if waiting for his mother's return. "Animals don't understand medical interventions," Marcus had argued during one particularly heated planning meeting. "She's been handled by humans, confined, medicated. She may have lost her natural wariness. Or she might associate humans with pain now," Daniel had countered. "Become more aggressive, especially toward rangers." In the end, Emily's unprecedented connection with Amber had been the deciding factor. If anyone could safely oversee the lioness's return to her natural habitat, it was the ranger who had formed this inexplicable bond. A soft throat-clearing sound interrupted Emily's reflections. Robert stood nearby, clipboard in hand, his expression professionally neutral but with a hint of the grudging respect that had characterized their interactions since the incident. "Transport team is ready when you are," he announced. "The documentary crew wants to get some footage of the release preparation. I've told them they can film from the observation vehicle only, no direct interaction with the subject." Emily nodded, standing to follow him to the medical center. "Has she been sedated for transport?" "Minimal dose," Jerry replied, falling into step beside them. "Just enough to keep her calm for the journey. We want her fully alert for the actual release." The medical center hummed with controlled energy as final preparations were made. "Amber, now officially the most famous lioness in Tanzania, if not all of Africa, lay in her transport crate, her amber eyes half-lidded from the mild sedation. The wounds had healed remarkably well, though her left shoulder bore a noticeable scar that would likely affect her hunting ability to some degree. "Hey there, beautiful," Emily said softly, kneeling beside the crate to make eye contact through the bars. "Today's the big day. Going home." As if understanding the words, Amber's eyes focused on Emily's face, that now familiar look of recognition and awareness that still sent chills down Emily's spine. The journey to the release site took just over an hour, the convoy maintaining a careful pace to minimize stress on the lioness. They had selected an area within Amber's established territory, but away from human activity centers, a location that offered good hunting opportunities and, most importantly, had shown recent signs of the young male's presence. A small crowd had gathered at a respectful distance to witness the historic release. Park officials, researchers, the documentary team, and a handful of specially invited observers, including representatives from international conservation organizations. As the transport vehicle came to a stop, Emily performed one final check of the area using high-powered binoculars. Satisfaction bloomed when she spotted what she'd been hoping for: a tawny figure watching cautiously from a distant acacia grove. "He's here," she confirmed to Njeri. "About 300 yards east, in the trees." The veterinarian smiled. "Perfect. Let's reunite this family." With practiced efficiency, the team positioned the transport crate facing the open savanna, door aligned with the most likely path Amber would take upon release. Emily took her position at the release mechanism, her heart pounding with a mixture of anxiety and anticipation. "Ready when you are," Robert called from the safety vehicle. Emily nodded, then focused entirely on the lioness inside the crate. "This is it, girl," she said softly. "You've earned your freedom back. Use it well." With a smooth motion, she lifted the latch and swung the crate door open, then stepped quickly to the side, giving the lioness a clear, unobstructed exit path. For several tense moments, nothing happened. Amber remained inside the crate, perhaps confused by the sudden offering of freedom, or simply cautious after weeks in captivity. The assembled observers held their collective breath, cameras whirring softly in the background. Then, with deliberate dignity, Amber rose and moved to the crate opening. She paused at the threshold, head raised, nostrils flaring as she processed the sense of her home territory. Her amber eyes scanned the horizon, locking briefly on the distant acacia grove where her offspring waited. The lioness stepped fully out of the crate, her movements showing only slight evidence of her injuries. She stood motionless for a moment, seemingly reacquainting herself with the feel of open savanna beneath her paws. What happened next wasn't in any release protocol or prediction. Amber turned, not toward the waiting young male or the open grassland, but directly toward Emily. With slow, purposeful steps, the massive predator approached the woman who had saved her life. Once at the trap, again at the canyon, and finally on the operating table. Emily remained perfectly still, aware of the gasps and murmured warnings from the observers, the click of cameras capturing this extraordinary moment. She could hear Robert's tense voice ordering the DART team to stand ready, could sense Njeri's professional concern radiating from nearby. But her focus remained entirely on Amber, whose approach continued with unhurried confidence. At approximately 10 feet away, well within lunging distance, the lioness stopped. For a breathless moment that seemed to stretch into eternity, predator and human regarded each other silently, their improbable journey together culminating in this unscripted encounter. Then, with deliberate intention that defied conventional wildlife behavior, Amber lowered her massive head in what could only be described as a gesture of acknowledgement, or perhaps, though Emily would hesitate to claim it aloud, gratitude. "Go on now," Emily whispered, her voice steady despite the emotion tightening her throat. "He's waiting for you." As if understanding the gentle dismissal, Amber raised her head, meeting Emily's gaze one final time. Then, with a powerful grace that belied her recent injuries, she turned and trotted toward the acacia grove, picking up speed as she approached her waiting offspring. The reunion between mother and son unfolded exactly as nature intended. Tentative approach, scent recognition, physical contact affirming their bond. As the observers watched through binoculars and telephoto lenses, The two lions disappeared together into the golden grass of the savannah, heading deeper into their territory. A spontaneous round of applause broke out among the gathered crowd. Researchers congratulated each other, documentary crew members exchanged satisfied nods, and Robert allowed himself a rare, unguarded smile of accomplishment. Emily remained apart, her own emotions too complex for the celebratory atmosphere. Joy, certainly. Amber was alive, reunited with her son, free once more. But also a curious sense of loss, an acknowledgement that something unique and profound had reached its natural conclusion. And Jerry approached quietly, standing beside Emily as they both gazed at the now empty horizon. "You know," the veterinarian said thoughtfully, "in traditional wisdom, there's a concept called animal spirits, the belief that certain creatures choose certain humans, forming connections that transcend ordinary understanding." Emily nodded, still watching the spot where Amber had disappeared. "Is that what you think happened here?" "I'm a scientist," and Jerry replied with a small smile. "But I'm also African. Some things can be true without fitting neatly into Western scientific paradigms." The departure from the release site was subdued, at least for Emily. As the convoy made its way back to the research station, she found herself repeatedly glancing back, as if expecting to catch one last glimpse of tawny fur among the grasses. That evening, the inevitable debriefing and celebration took place. The documentary director shared preliminary footage. Researchers discussed the implications for studies on animal cognition and interspecies bonding, and park officials celebrated both a conservation success story and the positive publicity it would bring. Emily participated minimally, answering questions when addressed directly, but otherwise remaining quiet, processing her own thoughts. Shortly after midnight, when the gathering had dwindled to just a few determined celebrants, she slipped away, drawn by some inexplicable need to be alone under the vast African sky. Her feet carried her to a small rise overlooking the station, her favorite spot for watching both sunrises and sunsets. The half-moon cast enough light to navigate safely, illuminating the landscape in ethereal silver. "I thought I might find you here," Robert's voice came from behind her. He approached carefully, 2 cups in hand, offering one to Emily. Hot chocolate, with a touch of something medicinal. She accepted it with a small smile. "Thanks." They stood in companionable silence for several minutes, sipping their drinks and contemplating the moonlit savannah. "The board has approved permanent funding for your lion behavior study," Robert finally said. "Unprecedented access, equipment budget, collaborative opportunities with international researchers. They're calling it the Amber Initiative." Emily raised an eyebrow. "So she gets the official name now?" Seemed appropriate. Robert conceded with a hint of amusement. More dignified than LF-217 for the conservation poster child. Another comfortable silence stretched between them before Robert continued, his tone more serious. "You know, when I first interviewed you for this position, I had my doubts. American academic, father's daughter, more passion than experience. I worried you'd be another Western conservationist with big ideals, but little understanding of the realities here. And now," Emily prompted when he paused. Robert met her gaze directly. "Now I believe you might be exactly what this place needs. Someone who sees these animals as individuals, not just population statistics. Someone willing to take risks, occasionally reckless ones, because some things matter more than protocols." The unexpected praise warmed Emily more than the spiked chocolate. "Thank you. Don't let it go to your head," he added gruffly. "I still expect proper procedure to be followed most of the time." "Most of the time," Emily agreed with a small smile. As Robert departed, leaving her alone with her thoughts once more, Emily's attention was drawn to movement at the perimeter of the compound. A familiar silhouette stood motionless in the moonlight, the unmistakable form of a lioness, watching from just beyond the fence line. Her breath caught. Amber. For several heartbeats, neither moved. Then, with deliberate grace, the lioness turned and melted into the darkness, a ghost of gold returning to her wild domain. Was it really Amber? Or perhaps another lioness entirely, drawn by curiosity or coincidence? Emily couldn't be certain. The tracking collar would confirm Amber's location in the morning report, of course, but somehow the ambiguity felt right. A reminder that wild things belong to themselves first and foremost, that human understanding has limits. In the days and weeks that followed, stories about the guardian lioness spread through local villages and across international conservation circles. Some called it remarkable animal behavior, others a freak coincidence. A few of the local guides spoke in hushed tones of old beliefs, of spirits that walked between worlds, of ancient connections between humans and the wild creatures with whom they shared the earth. Emily neither confirmed nor denied the more mystical interpretations. The truth, as she had experienced it, existed in that liminal space between scientific observation and something deeper, more primal, a recognition across species that defied easy categorization. Occasionally during her resumed patrols, she would catch glimpses of familiar tawny forms in the distance, mother and son, thriving in their natural habitat. The tracking data showed Amber adapting her hunting techniques to accommodate her injured shoulder, successfully bringing down prey with her son's increasingly competent assistance. Life in the Serengeti continued its eternal cycles: birth and death, predator and prey, dry season and wet. The poaching network that had threatened both human and animal lives was eventually dismantled through coordinated international efforts, though Emily knew other threats would inevitably arise. On quiet evenings, sitting on her porch watching the sunset paint the savanna in shades of gold and amber, Emily would sometimes feel a presence, not physical, perhaps, but real nonetheless. A connection forged in moments of danger and trust, a bond between woman and lioness that had somehow transcended the natural order. Some of the local rangers had started calling her Mlinzi wa Simba, the lion guardian. The name made her smile, recognizing its gentle irony. After all, who had truly been the guardian and who the guarded in this remarkable story? In the end, perhaps they had saved each other. And in that acknowledgement lay the true legend of the savannah, not a tale of human dominion over nature, but of mutual recognition across the divide of species. A reminder that in this ancient landscape where human consciousness first emerged, we remain, at our core, part of the same wild tapestry that connects all living things under the vast African sky. Leave a like, subscribe to the channel, turn on the notification bell, and if you watched until this point, comment, "I watched until here," and share your opinion about this story. Oh, and don't forget to watch the next video that appears on the end screen. It's very exciting.